right, here we go. Living now, living right now. This is L. Nathan here, your host here for this next hour at WFO 96.5 FM on your dial, Power 96.5 FM on your dial. Our principal sponsor, of course, the Community Action Organization of Western New York, still fighting the war on poverty, now in our 52nd year. I want to welcome all of you again to this hour of insight, introspection, and interpretation of facts, events, and trends affecting you right here and right now in Buffalo and the Western New York community, and in fact, connect you to communities all across the country. Each week we focus on things we think will be of interest to you, which will serve to motivate you and serve to connect you to the broader issues that affect our communities here in Western New York. Now, today's program is live, so you can call in, you can join our discussion. I hope that you will. Our number here again is 837-1112. That's 837-1112. Last week we had a discussion emerge revolving around the issue of abortion. And one of our callers, I won't get into names, one of our callers spoke about the fact that people talk about abortion as if it's an abstract thing. You know, we have, 20 million people. If we had 20 million more people, we'd have 40 million people, right? And they look at abortion from that perspective. Then there's some other people, who say, yep, so we need 20 million more parents who can take care of the 20 million more kids. Where are those parents coming from? Right? See, we have that side of the issue. And of course, people treat this almost as if it's a dialogue where the how shall I say it, the pro-choice or the, people that say that abortion is okay, that they're anti-nationalist, and the people who are anti-abortion, they take on the aura as if they're black nationalists, right? That they're supporting, the strengthening of the African community. So I want to take on this issue, and I hope that we can look at this in a more dispassionate, kind of a way. In other words, let's take the emotion and the name callings and, all of the idiosyncrasies about how we talk. Let's take that out of the game, for just a second. Let's just look at what it is that we're talking about. And I want to take it from the perspective of the people that are anti-abortion first, because their side of the conversation often doesn't get discussed on programs like mine. So let me get that part first. Then I want to talk about an alternative way of looking at the conversation from the direction, an alternative to the direction that the anti-abortionists are looking at the conversation. And just trust me, I'm gonna take this in a different direction than the way that you may think. But there's clearly a sentiment among some of us that the numbers of abortions in America, particularly of black children, amounts to being nothing less than genocide. That's how they look at it. On the other hand, there's an equal sentiment that bringing children into the world that you won't take care of is cruelty on its face. I mean, abortion, you don't even get to the planet to know what happened to you. Bringing somebody in the world you're not going to take care of leaves them here for 70, 80, 90 years in misery. We got to think about that, okay? I want to quote something to you from a woman named Irma Clardy Craven. She's a social worker and a civil rights leader. She passed away a few years ago, but she said several years ago, when 17,000 aborted babies were found in a dumpster outside a pathology laboratory in Los Angeles, California, they found that somewhere between 12 and 15,000 of those 17,000 aborted babies were black. That was intriguing, right? Because that suggested that at this abortion factory, where obviously thousands of abortions are being done at that particular site in Los Angeles, California, that the vast majority of the people that were babies that were being aborted were African babies. So that became something to think about. There are roughly 85 million American women ages 15 to 44. Of that group, at least 35 or 36% are members of what we call minority groups. According to blackgenocide.com, 36% of the abortions carried out were on pregnant African American women. So just think about that for a second, right? So 36% of all abortions are being committed on African American women. But African American women only make up 14% of American women. So that suggests that the abortion rate for African American women is pretty high compared to everybody else. So let's take a look at that issue. According to the Guttmacher Institute, black women are more than 5 times as likely as white women to have an abortion. I just want you to wrap your mind around that for just a second. When I was growing up, well, I was already grown. Sorry, I'm a little older than you. So when Roe versus Wade, came along in 1973, and the issue was decided on the basis of a woman's right to own her own body, that you couldn't tell her what she could do with her own body, and that just from a purely cognitive, logical frame of reference, you don't have the right to force me to threaten losing my life in order to save your life. Think of it like this. Let's suppose that there's a car accident, right? And you two people in the car. You're hanging on to the car, and there's somebody else hanging on to you. You're strong enough to pull you back into the car so you could climb over the other cliff, but you're not strong enough to pull you and the other person up. So it's either both of y'all die or one of y'all die. Now, it would be a heroic thing, a very noble thing, for you to risk your life to try to save the person who's hanging on to you, right? And I would hope that you would have the kahunas to do that. But I couldn't pass a law to require you to do that. That wouldn't make any sense, right? Well, in an abortion context, you have a fetus, an emerging person, whose life depends on the woman's life, the mother's life. And for those of you that don't get this, you are risking your life to be pregnant and bring a baby to term. Every single day of that pregnancy, all the way through delivering the baby, you could die anywhere along that way. People die of childbirth all the time, right? So you are literally risking your life as the mother of that child to bring that baby to term. In fact, you may have already risked your life by virtue of the fact that you got pregnant in the first place. There could be other stuff that's wrong with you as a consequence of you having become pregnant, right? So it's important to understand this contextually, that the Roe versus Wade decision essentially says that you can't make a law that requires one person to sacrifice their life, or at least put their life at significant risk in order to save another person's life. You can't make a law that does that. That's a value, that's a level of nobility that you would want a person to have, but you can't pass a law that requires that level of nobility, any more than you can't pass a law that requires me to donate to your favorite charity. I mean, you can say, man, it'd be nice if you donated to my charity, but you can't pass a law that requires me to donate to your charity. Now, I know that's not really the same analogy, but in a certain way, it kind of fits. You can't pass a law that requires me to sacrifice my life in order for you to live. You just can't pass a law to do that. I know that you would want me to do that, right? And I'm with you. I want you to do that too. But you can't pass a law that requires me to do that. Does that make sense? See, so, and I'm here with Emmanuel Radford, who does the live streaming of the program. And if you have a computer or a handheld device, you can type in Facebook on your device and then type in Living Now, and the program will come up. You can actually see us talking on the program. But in addition to that, you can type in your questions, your concerns, or your observations, and we'll respond to them on the air. And so on average, according to the Guttmacher Institute, there is something in the area of 1,876 babies aborted in the United States every single day. I know y'all get mad about the cocaine deaths, 250 or so, deaths a day. I know that bothers y'all. But the 1,876 babies that don't make it to the planet every single day in the United States. That sounds like a health issue too, doesn't it? The proportion of unintended pregnancies ending in birth, however, decreased across all racial and ethnic groups between 2008 and 2011. The proportion of women experiencing unintended pregnancy and choosing to end that unintended pregnancy with an abortion was higher among black women than among women in other racial and ethnic groups. The incidence of abortion has resulted in tremendous loss of life. If you view a child in the womb who is not at whatever y'all say, 22 weeks, whatever the rules are about when you become alive. I don't know how that works. If you're 20 weeks and 6 days, not quite 22 weeks, you're not alive. When you get to 22 weeks, then you're counted to be an alive person, right? I don't quite understand all of that stuff. But then, I'm just an administrator, executive administrator. What do I know about all of this, right? So you all can put your own thoughts on that. But the point I'm making is that the people that are in the anti-abortion movement see the aborted child itself as a human being who lost their life. Put it in that context. So it's been estimated that since 1973, black women have had about 16 million abortions. So let's work with that. Without the abortions, America's black community would now number 52 million people as opposed to 36 million people. There are roughly 36, 37 million African Americans, at least at the year point we're looking at in 2011. It's probably closer to 42 or so million African people right now. But let's say it was 36. Then we're talking about 16 million abortions on top of that 36. That would have been 52 million more or total African people that would be in the United States right now. Roughly a 40% increase in our overall African population. And of course, our position as the #1 minority group in the country would have been secured, right? Right now, we're #2, moving closely to being #3 because we aren't growing as fast as other minority groups, grow. Now, of course, Hispanics don't have to wait for kids to be born. They just walk over the border and they're already grown. They come at 200, 300, 400, 1,000 a year, so they grow faster than you grow because you're waiting on, your kids to be born, and you kill like 80% of the kids before they get born. So that's why you're not growing as fast. I'm just trying to be clear, right? That's why your population is not growing as fast as other populations in this country. Now, of course, if you look at the Caucasian population, African people are paralleling the Caucasian population in terms of population growth. We're getting to that close to zero, population growth because we're paralleling the patterns in Caucasian communities. When I was growing up, the point I was going to make before is we used to pride ourselves on the fact that other nations aborted their kids because they didn't care about their kids. Their kids were just, something useful or, something that was interesting to them or whatever. They got some kind of charge out of having a child. Where African people saw it as a reflection of our values and our pride in ourselves to keep our kids, not to abort our kids, right? We used to brag about that. But every year since Roe versus Wade, the percentage of African pregnancies that are terminated due to an abortion increases year after year after year because African people slowly absorb the patterns of Caucasian people. And how Caucasian people rationalize stuff becomes the way that African people rationalize stuff because that's what you hear all the time. You wind up absorbing other people's context. And so People that used to pride themselves on the fact that they didn't abort their kids are now the number one aborters of their kids. African people abort their children 5 times more percentage-wise than Caucasian people do. If you look at total abortions in the United States, Caucasian abortions represent 37% of total abortions in the United States. African abortions represent 36%. So we represent less than 15% of the population, but we have 36% of the abortions. That should tell us something. There's something, odd that's going on in our consciousness as a community of people. And so just thinking about that, if I can put this into numbers for you, let's suppose over that 45-year period from Roe versus Wade in 1973 to today, you had 16 million African people who, instead of being aborted, they stayed on the planet. Let's suppose those 16 million African people had grown to where they were earning an income, and let's say the income was minimum wage, $20,000, roughly a year per person. Multiply $20,000 a year, add on 4 zeros to 16 million, where you got 6 zeros, right? If you add on 4 zeros, then you got 10 zeros, right? Plus, you got 16 million times 2, so that'd be 32. You multiply that out, that's $32 trillion over the last 40 years that didn't get earned because African people didn't get to the planet. If you had $32 trillion more dollars invested into the body of African people as a whole, I don't think we'd be talking about poverty as a big issue, in this country. So there is an economic, reality to this, right? So I'm just trying to help us to look at the issue in different ways so that we can come up with our own thoughts about what makes the most sense. When I was looking at this issue in terms of how abortion has sort of changed over the course of the last 25 years, total abortions dropped, depending on what report you look at, anywhere from 26 to 42% between 1990 and 2014. Total abortions fell below 1 million for the first time in 38 years, according to the Guttmacher Institute. The abortion rate for 2014 was 14.6 abortions for every 1,000 women of reproductive age, age 15 to 44, and half of that, or half of what it is or what it was in 1981, when abortions were roughly 29.3 for every 1,000 women in that age group of 15 to 44. The Guttmacher Institute says that there were 18.8 abortions for every 100 pregnancies ending in live births, and an abortion ratio lower than at any time since 1972 in the Roe versus Wade, prior to the Roe versus Wade era. So we're talking about now having the least amount of abortions ever as a percentage of pregnancies in the United States. Yet within that number, African women abort their children 5 times more often than do Caucasian women, 3 times more often than do Hispanic women. So it suggests that there is something going on. And what I would suggest is that what's going on is that Caucasian women avoid getting pregnant in the first place. It's the new science, right? You don't have to get pregnant. There's really a possibility that you could not get pregnant. You could take your abortion. Your what do you call it? The birth control pills, right? You could use a diaphragm. You could use a condom. Something really unique that they just came up with this morning and whatnot, right? You could avoid getting pregnant in the first place, right? If you avoid getting pregnant in the first place, you're not going to have aborted pregnancies, right? So what appears to be going on here from just the number tracks that I've given you is that African women are less likely to be conscientious in using their birth control pills or using other devices in order for them to. And I know we got to take our break. So why don't we take our first break and then we'll get to our caller. So I just want you to have that in your head that African people, women, apparently are less loyal to using their birth control technology, whether it's pills or condoms or whatever it is. They're less loyal to doing that. Consequently, they are more exposed to unintended pregnancies. And then once you have an unintended pregnancy, the likelihood that you may use abortion as the way to stop that pregnancy goes way, way up. That's what I think is going on here. Let's take our first break, and then we'll take our next caller. So if y'all stick with us, we will send us out of the break here at Living Now, Living Right Now.
Do you want to increase your home's value?
Now here at WFO Power 96.5 FM on your dial. This is L. Nathan here, your host. I'm here with Emmanuel Radford, who does the live streaming of the program. And we're talking about this issue that came up last week about abortion and, the postures that people have taken. And as I'd indicated before, there's one side of the question that deals with being anti-abortion as if it's a level of black nationalism, and that aborting children is, for all intents and purposes, genocide that reduces the size and power and capability of African people in the United States. And the other side, that is pro-abortion, basically says that if you can't take care of these kids, why are you having these kids, right? I'm suggesting we go just one more step, right? How about maybe not getting pregnant in the first place? And let's talk about that, right? So we have a caller hanging on. Let me grab that call real quick. Hi, caller, are you there? Hi, Mother Dora, how you doing?
Well, this week I feel very good because I'm finishing up my winter course. Friday is my last day.
Excellent.
I think this has been the toughest course I've taken, and I also feel good that I just got approval for my topic for my dissertation. And
all right.
Write it a couple times before I got approval, but I got approval, so I can see the light at the end of the tunnel.
There you go. There you go.
I have another course to take in the coming up for the spring, and that'll take me right up until June, and then I start my dissertation this summer, Mr. Hare.
Okay, outstanding.
To celebrate.
Outstanding.
Anyway, the topic you have here is it's very sad.
Mm-hmm.
And there should be, in my mind, some kind of a plan or a campaign to inform our people, because I don't think a lot of people know this. I came to the knowledge of this during one of the emulsion programs, and Charlie Fisher gave all the statistics, and it was shocking.
Mm-hmm.
It was. So I think we need to have some kind of campaign in the community to inform people about the seriousness of these abortions. I have to remember and give credit to Hare Pascoe. I don't know if you know.
I know her quite well, yep.
Hare Pascoe is a senior citizen, and she was very outspoken and demonstrated on a regular basis against abortions. And you could always see her on the corner across the street from the abortion clinic on
Yep.
Main Street. No
Yep.
matter what the weather was, whether it was raining or snowing, she would be out there and way into her 80s. So I just think that we need to have some type of campaign to alert people to this, to teach young people and women, young women, what can you do to prevent pregnancies, as you said, in the first place, and then you don't have to go through this. So that really bothers me a great deal. I think I'm going to do a couple of articles on it myself. But I'll end by just announcing I have a special lecture coming up Saturday. You know, Saturday is St. Patrick's Day.
Yes.
So if people tune into my radio show at WUFO and 96.5 FM this Saturday at 11 a.m., my topic will be the Black Irish.
Oh, all right.
And I've done a lot of research on it, and what I want to explain to people is a couple of things. First of all, how did the Irish get to the Caribbean? Because that's a very important story. And especially, how did they get to Jamaica? And what is the relationship between Black history and St. Patrick's Day? There is a relationship. So tune in Saturday. I think I'm going to shock the airwaves. I'm going to say, I want to wish everybody a happy St. Patrick's Day, but I'm going to also give them the true story of the Black Irish.
I love it.
Thank you so much, and I'll hang up and I see what you have to say about the getting out in the community and just kind of letting people know about this issue of abortion. I'll hang up and listen
All
to
right.
your comments.
Thank you, Mother Doyle. All right, looking forward to that program. Black folks in Ireland, okay? Donald Trump may stop immigration from Ireland now. He found out there were black folks in Ireland. He may put them on the list, you know, of the countries. I'm not even going to say the words that he said, right? And so, let me just kind of summarize this portion of the discussion in an article on abortion and race in abort73.com. The article summary says, in the United States, black children are aborted, they say 3 times the rate of Caucasian children, although the Guttmacher report says 5 times the rate, and that Hispanic children are aborted 1.5 times the rate of black children, although the Guttmacher report says 3 times. But the quote I wanted to give you comes from Martin Luther King, who once said, "The Negro cannot win as long as he is willing to sacrifice the lives of his children for comfort and safety. How can the dream survive if we murder the children? Every aborted baby is like a slave in the womb of his mother or in the womb of his or her mother. The mother decides his or her fate." Now, I share this with you. Dr. King died in 1968, 5 years before Roe versus Wade. And so this is sort of a prescient comment because at that time, abortions were illegal. And people were going to, folks that I guess were doctors and whatnot, but they were not like above ground.
Under the table.
They were under the table kind of clinics. So if it's an under the table clinic, just think about what's underneath your table. Well, think about that as the environment that you're having the abortion in, right? So a lot of people died during the course of abortions because the abortion environment was not sterile enough, that there were not enough procedures to take care of what happens when something goes wrong, when a blood vessel gets broken, when something occurs that is unpredictable and the child is not aborted in the way that you had predicted, you end up endangering the life of the mother. And so I guess part of the momentum that led to the 1972-73 Roe versus Wade decision was the concern that women had about how many women were getting killed as a consequence of trying to abort a child because they felt that they couldn't raise that child. So it, to me, raises different issues. If you start with the position that every pregnancy should reach term, a successful term, assuming that the mother's not going to get killed, to have the child. I mean, sometimes you can know that to have the baby come to term would require you to kill the mother because there's something wrong, with that pregnancy. So I'm not talking about those kind of situations. That in most normal situations, if your goal is, or your value is, that every pregnancy should turn into a successful delivered birth, that's the position that you're taking, then you also have to have some kind of position about what you're going to do to support the children who are born as a result of that live birth. I mean, why take the position that everybody's got to get to the planet and then abandon them? All right. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take Bob first. Bob's probably going to have a anti-abortion position. So let me get his thoughts on this, and we'll get back to going on in our program. Bob, are you out there?
Yeah, Nathan. Haven't you ever listened to Mrs. Doyle talk about her husband Romeo and his Irish roots and going to Ireland and watching their faces drop? God bless you, Mrs. Doyle, because I do listen to what you have to say. Abortion's a billion-dollar-a-year industry, and they actually do keep you in the minority. And you're right, there are populations growing, and unless you get a handle on this, the black population will never grow because of the amount of abortion that's going on. And again, it's not one side of the aisle or the other, it's both sides, because I've listened to Paul Ryan sit there and say he was going to defund Planned Parenthood and turn around and give them $500 million. So you can't trust either side, but I'll tell you what, those kids do scream out to God as they're being aborted. And you would be surprised in how God responds in all of this. So I'm going to hang up and let you talk, and I do look forward to listening to Mrs. Doyle talk about the Black Irish. And Ms. Doyle is an Irish name.
There you go. All right.
Nathan, and we'll talk with you later.
All right. Thanks, Bob. So we're good? Okay. And so the de facto effect, I don't call it the main cause, but the de facto effect of putting abortion clinics in urban centers is that the abortion of Hispanic and black babies is more than double the percentage of the population. So this is, it's almost, it's cunning. I don't know what word to use to describe this. First, you create the ability to have abortions legally through Roe versus Wade. So now, abortions that never occurred before, they're really happening, right? And those abortions were mostly taking place amongst Caucasian people. Maybe 80% were taking place among Caucasian people, and only 15 to 20% were taking place among non-Caucasian people, because non-Caucasian people thought that it was like a horrible thing, like a crime, to abort your children. But over the course of time, Caucasian abortions have reduced significantly, not necessarily because Caucasians are having more kids. I mean, if we look at that from that perspective, the Caucasian population is literally at zero growth. So it's not because they're having more kids. They just defend themselves from getting pregnant in the first place much more efficiently than African and Hispanic populations. Right? I mean, they're making sure they're getting it done right away. They're taking, pills and shots and, diaphragms, and they're defending the gate, right, so that they don't get pregnant in the first place. Where African children or women are allowing themselves to get pregnant in the first place, right? So that's, to me, is the juxtaposition here. So I would ask us a different question. When I think about the sort of the black nationalists, we're losing all of these millions of African babies and whatnot, and, the frame of reference that we should find ways to not abort these children, as if the consequence would be that we would keep the children. So that's the way that the logic has to go. The ideation is if you don't abort the children, then the children would wind up getting born, right? Mm-hmm. So I get that. But that's not the only way to look at the issue. You could also look at the issue and say, well, if I don't think I can take care of a child that I might become pregnant with, maybe I should avoid getting pregnant in the first place. It's like
Common sense.
if I have a house and I don't like my house, I wouldn't run out on the street and destroy my house and then hope that somewhere along the way I'll find me a new house. I'd get me a new house first before I let go of my old house. That would be like just positive thinking and whatnot. Well, we're not thinking positively. If the issue is that you don't feel that you can handle a child, you can't take care of a child, then don't get pregnant in the first place. Why not try that model? So I asked this question: what if fewer pregnancies ended in abortion, not because of an abortion, but because there were fewer pregnancies? What if, as a result of accessing comprehensive health care, women and girls avoided unwanted pregnancies altogether, and we saw a steep decrease in the number of pregnancies in the first place? What if that were to occur? The net effect would be fewer numbers of African births. If the argument being made is that the number of aborted African babies amounts to genocide, that would mean that refusing to get pregnant also amounts to African genocide. If your logic is that 16 million African babies were aborted between 1973 and 2011, if that's your argument, and I hear that argument, that's factually true. If your argument is that if those 16 million African babies had not been aborted, they would have been born, and instead of having 36 million African people in the United States, you'd have 52 million people in the United States. If that's your argument, then if you were to successfully not get pregnant in the first place, and those 16 million pregnancies didn't occur because you took your birth control pills, you did your diaphragms, you did your condoms, you did whatever the tactics and techniques are to avoid getting pregnant, if that were to occur, you wouldn't have had those 16 million pregnancies in the first place. Would you argue that failing to have a child is genocide? Is that the position that you are taking? Because that's what it sounds to me like we're saying. We're taking the position that our growth rate, our growth as a community of people, as African people, is being marginalized to a tremendous extent because of abortion that prevents African children from being born in the first place. If that's the issue that we're arguing, then it wouldn't make any difference whether the pregnancy was ended by an abortion or if the pregnancy was stopped from occurring in the first place, because your objective is to grow more people, right? You don't care how it is that you grow. You're about not growing more people. So that becomes an issue. Lee had said something, I meant to speak to this a little bit earlier, that one of the reasons why you see fewer live births amongst African women and women in general is that as women become more mobile in the job market, become more able to participate in a wider spectrum of the job opportunities in the United States, they tend to be less interested in being pregnant and being mothers earlier in their lives, right? They want to get posted up in their careers and get established. And then once they become established, maybe now they're 30, 35 years old, then they're willing to have children because they know that they have a career of experiences that they can call on to be able to get back into the job market, because now they can say they got 10, 12 years of job experience in a particular career area. So that has a lot to do with this issue as well. So if we look at it from a population growth perspective, more blacks are killed by abortion each year in the United States than by all other causes combined. This is, you just got to think about that for a second, right? If you think about all of the reasons that you might die in the course of a year and take all of the ones except abortion, add them all up, that comes to a lower number than the number of African people that die due to abortion. Abortions take somewhere in the area of 343,000 African babies every year. There are less than that number who die from all the other causes of death combined, okay? So this is something that we need to take a look at. We have a caller hanging on? All right. Before I get into the rest of this, let me get this caller real quick. Hi, caller. Are you there?
Yes, how are you doing?
All right. How you feeling?
I'm thankful. I'm listening to you, and, it seems that we often let people draw lines for us, which maybe false divisions, between pro-life and pro-choice. How about we just celebrate life, celebrate life and do what's necessary to make sure that all life is taken care of, and that we get back to that idea of a village raising a child. For me, the thing about the abortion is you never know the potentiality of any child. So, what you might be aborting might be someone who will bring salvation to this world. So, I just think that we should think about celebrating all life and not letting people who want to say that they're pro-choice and pro-life, letting people divide us into those kind of, to me, artificial camps, because people are pro-life until you get born and then try to grow and be a healthy person. Then those same people who so-called pro-life are pro the death penalty or severe punishment.
Well, and not just on that range, but people also have to be pro everything you have to do to make the life of the child that is born possible. If that child winds up living in slums and living in depravity, living in incest, living in, all kinds of trauma, there's going to be a much higher percentage of those children whose lives are going to become harmful to the lives of everybody else than there are going to be children who end up being geniuses who become, P. Diddy or Jay-Z and so on. So, we have to look at it from all of that perspective. But the perspective that you're presenting is part of what we want to talk about, in today's program. So I appreciate that comment. Thanks. All right, let's take our last break, and then we'll get back into our subject. So if you all stick with us, we will see you inside of the break here at Living Right Now.
Do you want to increase your home's value?
Living Now here at 96.5 FM on your dial. This is El Nathan here, your host here with Emmanuel Radford. And we were just kind of on a tangent talking about school suspensions and whatnot, but I'll get into that next week. I hope I'll have Umar Johnson on next week and we can talk about the school suspension issue. There is also a sort of race component on that issue as well. See, it's important for us to understand things in context. So when you study school suspensions, for example, and you find that African children make up, 17 or 18% of the school population, but they make up 60% of the suspensions, on the face of it, that looks wrong, right? Mm-hmm. So what tends to happen, however, is the school districts, because they don't want to be judged as being, racially oriented, they'll just start saying, well, just don't suspend those kids. They do something, wag your finger at them, and then send them back in the classroom. And so the number of suspensions goes down, but the tone and tenor of conduct in the school also goes down. And we end up having more and more in-school problems because we're not addressing the problems that cause the school suspensions in the first place. My position is that if you actually care about something, you would study why these suspensions are occurring and then try to figure out what you have to do to stop those factors that are causing the suspensions in the first place. The suspensions are caused because you have, warring camps of kids from different neighborhoods. Then you got to start tackling that issue. Maybe you need to have fewer kids from different neighborhoods going to a school. How about going back to neighborhood schools? Everybody's in the same camp. All of a sudden, neighborhood beefs disappear. I'm just saying, little things like that. Well, that's when I think about this abortion issue. I'm trying to help us to see it from a number of different perspectives. The CDC reports that in the 1970s, roughly 24% of all abortions were performed on black women. That percentage rose to 36% in the 1980s, 34% in the 1990s, 36% in the 2000s. Now, what that tells me is that it's not that African women were getting pregnant more frequently than they had been getting pregnant in 1972, or 1960. It's that African women, now because of the legality of abortion, were choosing abortion as the way to terminate their pregnancies at a much higher rate than other populations in this country had been doing. Why was that? Well, that was because they were not defending themselves from getting pregnant in the first place, right? So it seems to me that the solution to that part of the problem is to not get pregnant in the first place. What are we doing to improve the I know y'all don't like for me to say it like this, but the efficiency of African women in defending themselves from getting pregnant in the first place? What are we doing to cause that to occur? Well, part of that is accessible women's health facilities, primary care, right? So that if there is greater access to primary care, and your insurance, Obama's Affordable Care Act, enables you to be able to access birth control and those kinds of services as a part of your basic health insurance itself. You don't have to pay any additional money for it. Then the likelihood is you're going to have fewer pregnancies because people will get pregnant less frequently because they would defend themselves from getting pregnant in the first place, okay? Now, that to me allows you to then have a different conversation. For those that are sort of the black nationalist, wing of this discussion that are saying that you're reducing the number of African people in the country in the first place and that's not good, well then you need to have a different conversation. That conversation should not be about abortion. That conversation should be about we need to be growing the number of African children that we have so that we grow the base of the economic base of capability of African people in the United States. And so that would then require another level of discussion. How do we then support African women who become pregnant and bring their children to term? And that conversation can't be what do George Bush and Nancy Pelosi and the national government, state governments, what they're going to do to make that happen. That's not where that conversation has to occur. That conversation has to occur inside the African community. You got to get the churches and the mutual benefit associations within the African community. They're going to have to be willing to tax themselves. In other words, African people are going to have to tax themselves and create a African American mutual support network where dollars go out of our community, like United Way dollars, come out of your check. You need to have dollars come out of your checks that go to a national, state chapter-based African child support network that follows up on children, follows up on families, makes sure that we're doing everything in our power to ensure that those children are growing in terms of verbal literacy, they're growing in terms of the kinds of experiences that they have that allow them to be at par or above other children who go into kindergarten, that they're being supported in terms of the educational environments and nurturing environments around those children. You got to start there, because if you don't do that, then you're creating more hurt than help. And I hear the conversation that, well, one of those 16 million aborted African children could have become, George Washington Carver, could have become Benjamin Banneker. You're absolutely right. But what's the percentage of those 16 million that are going to become Benjamin Banneker or McCormick or Lassiter, and so on? What's the percentage that are going to become them? And what's the percentage that are going to wind up going to prison? I mean, that's not my numbers. Your numbers say that 30% of all African males 15 to 30 years old end up spending some time in jail or in prison before they get out of that age spectrum. That, to me, tells you a lot about what's going to happen with that 16 million, population, right? 30% of them, if not more, are going to end up being poor. All of them, almost all of them, are going to end up being poor during the time period of being born to being 6 years old. I mean, the poverty rate for women who have kids, who are single women who have kids, age birth through 5, the poverty rate is like 82%. Okay, I mean, they're like in prison. I'm talking about the ones that are with mothers that are under age 25, end up with 82% end up in poverty, right? So that's what you are consigning those 16 million children to. So if you're going to argue that we need to continue to grow the population of African people, then you have to also argue that the burden for making that growth stand up, that it turns into positive growth for the African community, you have to take on responsibility within the African community to follow up with those pregnancies, helping them to turn into successful births, and help those successful births turn into kids who succeed in getting into kindergarten at a high level of academic and social competency that then you continue to water and nurture until those children get to the end of high school, go into post-secondary, education, and become, contributors to our society. If that's not what you're getting done, what are you talking about? So listen, we got a caller hanging on. Hopefully I'm making some kind of sense. Hi, caller, are you there?
How you doing?
All right, how you feeling?
Good there. One question here.
Sure.
How about the male component on this planet? Nobody gets here by yourself.
Right.
Everything's done to women, but in this country and around the world, they made sex recreational. It's been done on for all human beings, but more in America. And when the African man is going to stand up and take care of his responsibilities that he's supposed to take care of here, back in our time in Africa. So we got our children over there working the fields, working for a telecommunications company, picking up cocaine and stuff. And no one cares about their education.
I agree. It seems to me that we're having our it's what I always say. We always have our conversations revolving around what somebody else did to African people and what somebody else should be doing about what was done to African people. And I'm not saying that those conversations are not valid. People are doing things cognitively, consciously to African people. That is going on. That can be documented. And there are things, the people who are the perpetrators of those behaviors, there should be consequences to their perpetration. That should be done. But at the end of the day, if it's your refrigerator does not have any food in it, who's responsible to get food in your refrigerator? Obviously, you're the one responsible to do that. So even though other people may be doing things that are destructive to the interest of African people, it's African people who have to do things to reverse that, to overcome that. So we're going to take the position that we want to have as many kids as we have so that we can grow to be the largest population that we can possibly be in the United States. If that's the position that we're going to take, then you have to have other positions, right? And we're not talking about those other positions because the other positions require you having to do something yourself. If I say that we can create a national network of child support and family support structures that help us to coach and nurture and mentor families so that those kids grow up to be successful kids. If that's the position that we're going to take, somebody has to pay for that. That means every paycheck's got to have, $5 go to some, national, version of a Black United Way, if you will, right? That is going to be taking that money, then using it to do statewide initiatives that can be incubated at local levels and whatnot. That has to be done. If you're not willing to do that, then you're lying. You're basically just saying populist stuff. You're acting like Donald Trump, just saying stuff because it sounds good, but you don't really intend to do anything, about it. If you're not going to fight for people, if you're not going to fight to get something done, why talk about it at all? Why even say these things? So my position is that I don't want to argue whether or not I'm for abortion or against abortion. I think that's the wrong conversation. I want to argue that if we're going to bring children onto the planet, we have to take responsibility for those children collectively. That can't be up to social services. It can't be up to the governor's office. It can't be up to the county executive. It's got to be us as individuals. We have to be willing to put resources up, and some of us are going to have to take lower paying jobs and become the people who serve those families, who serve those children. You're not going to get $100,000 a year to be, a coach, a family partner, and so on, at that kind of not-for-profit level. But some of us are going to have to be willing to do that and take less money. Maybe you make $30,000 a year rather than $100,000 a year. Somebody has to be willing to do that in order for this to stand up. And this conversation doesn't go anywhere. That's what my point is. We're just saying stuff that sounds like we're tough and we're black nationalists and we're this and we're that, but we're not saying anything about what we're going to do to change the actual reality for human beings. If we're going to bring 16 million new people onto the planet, or 330 or 40,000 new people a year onto the planet in the African community, then you got to have a game plan on how you're going to take care of those people, right? How are you going to coach the people that had those kids? How are you going to coach those families? How are you going to provide structures that those kids can go to, that they can say, I'm a part of an African family, and I know that I can go to these structures, and they're going to help me, like the historically black colleges and universities. We need historically black college family care organizations and child care organizations, if that makes any kind of sense. I hope that makes some kind of sense.
Oh, yeah.
Yep, so that's my thought, okay? All right, you're most welcome. We have another, okay, let me grab, we have 2 minutes, or we have, just got 2 minutes, so there's a lot more to talk about here. Two quick core points. 80% of all single women under the age of 25 with children under the age of 5 in this country live at or below poverty. 80%. 65% of single women under the age of 65 who have a child under the age of 18 live at or below poverty. Being a single woman with a child, or more than one child, is like a disease in this country. It's like an economic disease. You catch poverty and then you keep it all the way until your kids get to be 18 years old. You keep poverty, right? So it's important that we address this issue in the context that we're talking about. All the social phenomena that tends to be experienced by this population group will become the reality in terms of the impoverishment, becomes the reality of these 16 million now unaborted children, 16 million children that come onto the planet. So let's not stop talking about these 16 million as if it's a number. Let's talk about it like it's 16 million human beings. And what's the reality going to be for those 16 million human beings? Right. So I know we're at the end of the program, so we've done all that we can. Look forward to talking to you all next week, hopefully making some kind of sense. We'll see you all next week here at Living Right Now.